Hello, everyone. How are you all doing? So, hopefully, you had a chance to watch the videos from last week, and now you know what Android Studio is, what it can do for you. And that's what we'll be using all along for Android development. So, we'll continue that today. And before I move on, I would just like to thank those of you who introduced themselves in the forums. If you haven't done so, please go to the iOS course in Blackboard and introduce yourselves. That's for the benefit of your classmates and also for my benefit, so I know what you all, what kind of backgrounds you bring in, and if there is anything I need to keep in mind when I'm delivering these lectures. So let's get started with what we are going to do today. This is the second week. Let's look at a recap of the last week. Go a little bit into the details of what we did last week. So last week you saw our Android Studio, and we actually went over installation, configuration, and usage of Android Studio. So those of you who did not have it set up should have it by now. And to learn how to use it, we created the very first app, a Hello World app. And through this app, we saw what the layout editor is, how to add components to it. Very simple things we did, added a button. And then you added interactions. You started listening to what to do, what happens when somebody touches that button and what to do. So that's what we tackled. And you saw a little bit of code in the Java programming language. Many of you are already familiar with Java, so that's good. And as you see more and more of this code, you will get more well-versed with it. And finally, we talked about our philosophy of learning by doing. And that's one thing I'm going to stress again and again. The more you do something, the more you practice, the better you get at it. You gain mastery by practicing. So we'll get plenty of opportunities for that. Also, by now, you should be familiar with the Blackboard shell that we are using for this course. If there is anything you have doubts about, feel free to write to me. My information can be found on Blackboard under contact information area. So today's class is before I talk about it, I don't know if you have already watched this week's iOS videos. If not, this would be a good place to talk about it. You will see that as the course progresses, again and again, we will be doing the same thing that we are doing in iOS, we'll do in Android. So there will be some overlap of concepts, of functionality. There are different ways of doing things. The programming language itself is different. In iOS, we use Swift. Here we'll be using Java or Kotlin. We'll talk a little bit about that today. And we'll try and use the same examples. So the logic part of it will remain the same. And our focus can then, which is the ideal scenario, will be more and more on the app development aspects. So that's our plan. So there is this calculator app that we are going to develop in Android and in iOS. Same app, maybe the topics we covered this week in Android may be different from the ones in iOS, but at the end of the 2 weeks, this is going to take us 2 classes, 2 weeks. So at the end of those 2 weeks, you will see that we have developed a very similar app in 2 different platforms, which in itself is a wonderful experience. And this app that you will develop over these 2 weeks is actually an in-class assignment, carries a weightage of 5%, and it's due on Sunday, 7th of February. So keep that in mind. Follow along, do the work, and when you're done with it, when you're done with the next week's class, you will have an app ready to submit. So this is basically a very easy 5 marks. So don't miss out on that. All right, so for this app in Android, we'll be using Java as our programming language. And the app We'll develop in Android Studio. I'll show you how to debug apps, how to create breakpoints, and how to look for problems that how to solve the problems that maybe you're facing. And we'll look at different methods of creating layouts, how to lay things out. We touched upon it. Excuse me. We touched upon it a little bit last week when we wanted to place an element right in the center of the screen, if you remember. So this is our general plan for this week and next, and we'll look at additional topics as they come up. Okay. So there are two programming languages that Android supports native app development for native app development. One of them is Java, the other one is Kotlin. You will, in this MDev program, you will see other ways of developing cross-platform apps where, the language may be different. But native apps, there is Java or Kotlin. Now, it is really important to know both of these languages because most apps that you use today on Android are developed in Java. Java has been around for 20 years, whereas Kotlin, the first standardized version that Android started supporting, is not very old. It's probably a year and a half, when they made it official that Kotlin is their, going to be one of the main languages. So that's why it is important to know both. They're very similar. Kotlin has similarities with Java, which when we do both of them, you will see what those similarities are. What we will be doing today, this calculator app will be developing in Java. And then later on, some of the future apps will use Kotlin. So you get a feel for both of them, which would be important for newer apps in the future may use Kotlin. So it's good. Okay. So that's our introduction overview. Now to get started, I would like you to do something. We'll create a new project as before, as last week. And like last week, I want you to use your name in the project name, but then I'm going to add a twist this week, add something called the color division. I'm going to assign a color to each one of your different color. And this will be based on the last digit of your student number. And each one of you you will have one color. That does not mean that, let's say, color is red. If three of you have the red color, you can work together. No, the idea here is that you continue to work independently, individually. You can, of course, if you're running into problems and you want to have a friend, help with, let's say, some error you are getting in compilation, those kind of things are okay. But otherwise, you work independently because it is ultimately an assignment that needs to be submitted. And I want to avoid certain things that can happen. So basically, this gives you an opportunity to work independently and me an opportunity to assess everybody fairly. So make sure that you use the right color. Your color division, here are the divisions based on the last digit of your student number. So here is an example. If your student number was this 2021136, then your last digit is 6, and you will be using orange as your theme. And you will see how to use it later on. So just look at your last digit and determine what color scheme you are going to be using. Okay. So we'll go back one slide, and in Android Studio, we'll create a project. So let's fire up the Android Studio. And we'll create a new project. Okay. Now it is going to ask us what kind of project template. We'll choose the simplest one, which is empty activity, like last time. We don't want anything else right now. So choose empty activity under phone and tablet and click next. And this is where you will use your color division. And I don't have a student number, so I'm just going to choose randomly the color for me. I'm going to choose blue. Okay, so that's what I'm going to call it. And over here, if you are using a device for your development, uh, you can actually, in any case, you can go back. Let's go with here, go with API 19 KitKat. And that will tell us your device will run on 98, your app will run on 98% of the devices. When we change this, it tells us what percentage of devices. Many people have older hardware which does not support newer operating system, newer versions of Android. So in those cases also your app will run. Our app is fairly simple. We want it to run on as many devices as possible. Make sure the language you choose is Java right now. Don't use Kotlin at the moment. Okay. So when we say finish, Android is going to create the bare bones, the skeleton of the project that we can start working on. So that's what we will be doing. Let it take, it takes a few moments normally. There's a lot of things. Wonderful. So it will give us basically the two files that matter. They both show up here in the editor area. The one is called mainActivity.java. We saw this last time in our Hello World. And the other one is activity main.xml. XML files, this activity main.xml, this is the one where the layout of the app. So basically, you've got a layout in the XML file and you've got the functionality, what happens, all the interactions in the main activity. And this is an example of model view controller. So right now, it's a design pattern that we use in software engineering. And this is our view. It's being initialized right now, but what it does is it gives us a basic, like last time, it will put a hello world in the middle of the page here. And whatever activity happens here, we link it with the main activity. And this here extends app compat activity class. Let's find out what this is. Okay. If we hover here, it tells us what it is. Base class for activities that wish to use some of the newer platform features on older Android devices. So this is compat, is compatibility. It provides us backward compatibility. So it goes back to whatever list the lowest version of Android was. And what we are doing is we are extending it. And if let's look at its documentation. I want you to also get familiar with those things. So any of these native classes, if you search on the internet, typically the first link will be from this website, developer.android, and this is the documentation. So this is the app compat activity, and this is its documentation. And here you can see what is, what all functions, etc., methods. The term used in Java for functions is methods, and constants and fields. These are variables. And these are things that are declared as constants, which you may be using in your app. So let's see what we have here. Here we have one function which is called onCreate. It came like this, right? And this override declaration means that there is a function already there in app compat activity, which we are overriding here. And I'm going to explain to you what each of these lines is. So first, let's look at the documentation of onCreate. on constant, okay, app compat activity on create. There, public constructors. Alternate constructor that can be used to provide a default layout that would be inflated super dot on create. Okay, what's going on here is super dot on create. So this method, this on create, actually is in the parent of app compat activity. That's why I can't find it here in this list. It goes from on content change to on create support and then on key down. There is no on create because it's in the parent of a app compat activity. So let's look at its hierarchy. What is the parent? There is fragment activity component like this. It goes all the way up. And I do believe that this is likely to be in the activity. Yeah. See, this is the life cycle of the activity. Within the Android operating system, when an activity is launched, first thing that happens is that the onCreate function of this activity class is called. And this is where we do things like, okay, this is the layout, this is what you're going to show. And then these are the various stages in its life cycle. So from launch to running, this is where you're interacting with the app. All the time you're interacting, it's in the foreground, it's here. And let's say you switch to some other activity, then it can go back into the background and then it can be resumed and on resume would be called and this cycle can continue. And if you kill an app, then this proceeds to destroy an activity is shut down, right? So this is our what is going on, and these are the main functions. On create is a part of the activity. So what is going on when this activity is created? We call super.onCreate, and this bundle is basically a set of arguments. If you're running a program, a Java program, let's say, and you have that main function of the class and you call it, you can provide it arguments and it uses them. You can use them in the program, right? It's the same concept here. There are arguments which the operating system can provide it. For example, when you click on a link in somewhere in an app and it opens the browser on your phone, it provides the URL as an argument and it directly goes there. So here we use those arguments to call this keyword super is like calling the same function in the parent class. So this main activity, when it says super.onCreate, it's going to app compatibility's onCreate function, which in itself may delegate it, keep on delegating it to its parent object until it finds the ultimate one. And then this is the key. This is what is of most interest to us. Set content view r.layout.activity main. See this word activity main? Notice that it's the same as this. So that's what this is doing. It's calling this set content view function of app compat activity, which is our parent class, and saying set the content view as whatever is in this activity main. And what is in this? In this is hello world. So when we run this app and this toolbar here, this play button is to run, and I will explain some of these later on today. So let's run this. It's going to run on the Pixel 2 emulator I have installed. And like last time, we'll just see a hello world right now. And then we will get into designing the actual calculator. So for now, let's just get the first build and run completed. Okay, so this is what it shows up like. It has the title that we gave it and the hello world, basically the label that we put. or actually Android Studio put for us. So that's where we have the app, the bare bones of the app available to us. Let's see what our next task is. So our next task is to actually design what the app is going to look like. And we'll do that next.